We will be celebrating the 70th birthday of the NATO alliance, and we will also be meeting in summit. But this is an event where we are to tackle strategic points. We are to touch upon what the aim of the NATO alliance is to be and what key areas we can work on in the future. And I feel that there are key areas that we can focus on. We have spoken about this just over the past hour, and over the past few days I've spoken with other European leaders on these major topics. The first fundamental topic is the following. How can we ensure peace and stability in Europe? This is the fundamental origin of NATO. NATO was created in 1949 to provide us with a barrier against the Soviet threat from the West. The Iron Curtain fell. A few days ago, we marked the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Pact of Warsaw is no longer as well, and we are here to try and ensure collective defense of the European continent. And this is what we are to focus on. We have had dialogue with Russia, which is robust dialogue with Russia. And I hope to try and continue that dialogue forward in the future. And when speaking with the Russians, I do understand where each of us lie. Europe is a continent of history and geography. We share a border with Russia, so therefore we cannot forget it, because Russia is, geographically speaking, part of Europe. We also share a number of concerns with all of our European partners, and this is something that I take on board entirely, and I make it a key priority for me. And I want to ensure that all Europeans are aware of this, because in the Black Sea and the Baltic regions, NATO has provided support and assistance. And we will do everything that is in our power to defend our sovereignty when it is threatened. But absence of dialogue with Russia, has it really made the European continent safer? Is European stability possible when we don't tackle the major issues at hand, when we don't tackle the Ukraine issue? I don't think so. It is in the interests of peace and stability in Europe that we, along with the German Chancellor in Normandy, will ensure that we can fully implement the Minsk agreements, because it is for such issues that we need to strive forward for the betterment of Europe, for further safety and security. And we need to do so by ensuring that our relations with Russia are clearer. And again, for these reasons, for peace and stability in Europe, again, this is the key objective here. We need to better have discussions as to how to manage weapons and armaments. We can do this by multilateral agreements. There are also bilateral agreements between Russia and the United States. We have had the opportunity in the past to say, with much regret, that we understand why the United States wanted to pull out of the INF agreement. The INF was seen by the United States as no longer being worth their while. However, it is for us, for European allies, to ensure its continuity. And we have done the best to decry situations when the Russians violated the agreement, and then to decry the withdrawal of the United States from the agreement. And therefore, it is, in my eyes, essential for us at the beginning of our discussions next week to touch on this topic, to discuss it within our alliance, within NATO alliance, and then to discuss with the United States how can we ensure the safety of today and safety of future. And the agreement that will replace the INF treaty will hopefully come out from within the alliance, within European members of the alliance, but this requires all European members to be on board. We cannot hand over our safety and security to a third party, to an organization that Europe is not a member of. And then we have some countries, like Poland, that was not protected by the INF. So we hope for the new framework, the new treaty, to take into account all those countries who are most directly affected by borders with Russia. And on this topic, I'm sure there will be questions about this in a few moments. We have heard a lot in the media, a lot of reactions to the letter published by President Putin. France answered with its own open letter, and not all allies did the same. But I think having open dialogue is a good way of moving forward. We did not accept the moratorium that Russia proposed, but we said, in order to open dialogues, then we aren't not just to sideline it, we're not just to sweep it away, we need to take it on board. Here, we're talking about the security of Europe, so we need to have an open discussion with Russia. The second major topic, in my eyes, that we need to solve, obviously not necessarily during the summit, but over the coming months, is the following issue. How does NATO organize itself, and against what risk? It is a collective organization, but against what risk? Against whom are they organized? Who is our common enemy? What are the common issues? These are questions that need to be clarified. And, as you can see, it is a question that is of strategic importance. Is it Russia? China? Is it up to NATO to say that they have one enemy? I don't think so. The common enemy within the alliance is terrorism. Terrorism which has affected all of our countries. It is fighting against terrorist organizations, those organizations that the French troops are fighting against in the Sahel region, and that have caused considerable losses that I mentioned just a few moments ago. Fighting in the Sahel region is to protect security for all of us, protect our allies, and to be up to the military and operational responsibilities that befall all of us. So we need to have a shared definition of what terrorism is, what terrorist organizations are, and what the response is to be. And I want to be clear on this. To say that we are all for collective security, that is not sufficient. You need to show it. You need to put deeds to words. And therefore, we need to have a discussion with allies on concrete action that we can take to tackle terrorism in the Levant, in the Sahel region. We saw what happened in Turkey just in recent past, which questions the implication of our alliance. We need to focus on what the rights and responsibilities of all allies are. So solidarity between allies is so important, but it only takes on full meaning if we can agree and coordinate so that all actions carried out by one member will not necessarily impact the strategic importance of another ally. As we saw what happened in Turkey, we cannot say that we are allies on one hand and say that we need to stand united, but then on the other side, to say that we have one of our allies that is carrying out some form of active military operations which threaten all of the work that we have been trying to do to tackle Daesh. Again, the armament systems, the S-40 and the air defense systems of NATO are so important. Interoperability is the key word here, because that is where the military might of our organization lies. And this is something that we have spoken on in a number of weeks in the past few weeks, especially in light of what has been happening in Turkey. Again, France is committed, France's army is committed to defending peace and security. And this is why France is a trustworthy ally. And this is why France is also a demanding ally. In key moments, France wants all of the strategic questions to be tackled and analyzed. Our soldiers know what it means to be an ally in the field. So when the heads of state and government will meet, we need to uphold the expectations that those soldiers have in us. I believe greatly in the importance of our alliance. And I believe in the importance of the discussions that we have had here today, the ones that we will have in London, and the ones that we'll have in the future to ensure the future of our license. And again, thank you very much, Secretary General, for being here in Paris and for the quality of the conversations that we have had this morning. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dear Emmanuel,
Thank you,
it's great to be
President.
back in Paris and to meet with you again. And we just had good and open discussions addressing a wide range of issues, addressing how we can further strengthen and modernize the NATO alliance and how we can stand together as we face new and difficult security challenges. France has outstanding troops, high-end military capabilities, and you have the political will to deploy them when needed. You play a major role in the fight against terrorism, with thousands of troops deployed in the Sahel and in the Levant. I would like to express my deepest condolences for the loss of your soldiers in Mali this week. They were there to protect our shared security. My heartfelt sympathy to their loved ones and to the people of France. In uncertain times, we need strong multilateral institutions like NATO. NATO is the only platform where North America and Europe can address strategic issues together. We do that on a daily basis. Issues like the fight against terrorism, how to deal with a more assertive Russia, and the rise of China. And over the last years, NATO has implemented the largest reinforcement of our alliance since the end of the Cold War, with higher readiness of forces, with combat-ready troops deployed to the east of the alliance for the first time in our history, with a new command structure, and we see that European allies are stepping up, and also that the United States are increasing their military presence in Europe. So the paradox is that while questions are being asked about the strength of the transatlantic bond, North America and Europe are doing more together than we have done for decades. And I can hardly think about any stronger demonstration of the commitment to our alliance, to our collective defense, to Article 5, than the fact that we are actually doing more together, increasing readiness of our forces, investing more in our security than we have done for many, many years. I also welcome that France is stepping up, investing more, and that you are increasing your defense budgets. And I also welcome your support for European Union efforts on defense. Done in the right way, these efforts can strengthen NATO's European pillar. But the European Union cannot defend Europe. European unity cannot replace transatlantic unity. A strong NATO and a strong European Union are two sides of the same coin. Both are indispensable for the continued freedom and prosperity of Europe. It is no secret that NATO allies have differences on different issues, including the situation in northeast Syria. But we agree on the fundamentals, standing together, defending each other. Article 5, our collective defense clause, is an ironclad commitment by all allies. So, Mr. President, the foundations of NATO are strong. We will continue to adapt, continue to modernize, and together we will look on how we can further strengthen NATO's political role. And I look forward to meet you again next week at the leaders' meeting in London. Thank you.
On va répondre, je crois, à deux questions.
Bonjour, je suis Romain Rivet de l'AFP.
Member from AFP. Would you be in favor of NATO being involved in the Sahel region to tackle jihadist movements there? And Secretary General, are you dissatisfied with the new cost burden sharing within NATO with a drop of US contributions and an increase of German financial contributions? And what about France? Thank you very much.
Sur le Sahel,
To talk about this to the Sahel,
et comme Monsieur le
as
Secrétaire
I said
général
earlier, and as the Secretary General
La
just
France,
recalled,
est impliquée
France
et agit
is involved in the area and
avec
acts
d'ailleurs plusieurs alliés
on
qui
behalf
sont
of
à nos
all
côtés également
allies,
engagés et
allies
qui
who
saluent
are there in
la
the field with us,
présence
and I would
et
like to
l'engagement de ces
welcome
équipements
the
ou d'ailleurs
presence and assistance
et
provided in terms of either
saluer à
troops
nouveau
or
nos armées et nos
material
soldats.
assistance.
Leur redire
And I would just like to say that I have unwavering trust in
la
the
mission qui est la
soldiers
nôtre là-bas est
in combat
importante.
there. Our mission in the area is an
Le
important
contexte que
mission,
nous sommes en train de vivre au Sahel
but what we are currently living through in the Sahel
conduit,
region
aujourd'hui
leads
à
us
regarder
today
toutes les options stratégiques.
to look at all other
Nous
strategic
faire une
options.
première réunion
I have already held
et les
an
prochaines
initial
semaines seront
meeting,
consacrées
and the
à
coming
un
weeks
travail en profondeur que j'ai
will be
demandé
spent
au gouvernement et à nos armées.
on focusing on an in-depth
Regarder
analysis
les
of
modalités de
how our armies
notre
operate in the area,
Et je le
the
dis,
different
les options
ways
sont
that we
aujourd'hui
carry out missions in the area. And again,
ce
all
contexte-là,
other options are
en fonction
still
des
open
décisions que la
to
France aura
change.
à prendre.
But
Une
France
plus grande implication des alliés
will
évidemment quelque chose qui
tackle the issue of maybe having
pour
more
revenir ensuite
international
plus financier.
assistance.
Le secrétaire général
Any
a
help
rappelé
is always good in such a domain. In terms of investing in French defense,
la loi de programmation militaire et les
this is
choix qui
something
sont,
that obviously can be seen with the recent defense
nous
budget.
avons ensuite un partage qui est clairement établi.
Obviously, we
La France ne
have
reverra pas
a
ces règles de partage
sharing of the cost
évoquées.
burden, which is well established.
Si certains veulent voir ce qu'ils appellent le cost sharing,
Some people call it cost sharing.
ils peuvent venir lundi aux cérémonies que la France organisera.
And then they can attend the ceremony that France will organize on Monday, and they will see the true cost.
The issue of burden sharing in this alliance in NATO, I think it is important to distinguish between the two very different things. One is the total defense spending, how much allies invest in the national defense. That's total defense spending in national defense budgets. The other issue, which is about much less money, is how to finance the NATO budget, the running of the NATO headquarters and some common funded capabilities. On the first issue, total defense spending, we have seen a significant shift over the last years. Because after the end of the Cold War, all allies were cutting defense budgets. Now we see that all allies have stopped the cuts. All allies are investing more. More allies meet the 2% guideline, also investing 2% of GDP on defense. And the majority of allies have already plans in place on how to meet that guideline by 2024. And France is increasing significantly, and France has clearly stated they will also meet the 2% guideline. So when it comes to total defense spending, we have seen a significant increase by allies. And if you add together what European allies and Canada do, they will have added more than 100 billion more for defense since 2016. And based on the national plans, they will add even more in the coming years. So there is no doubt that we have seen a significant change. Allies are investing more. France is investing more. Allies are investing more, and France is investing more. And this is because we live in a more unpredictable world. We need to invest more in our shared security. Then a total different issue is actually the issue you asked me about, and that is how to fund the NATO budget, the headquarters, and so on. And it's correct that we have now agreed a new formula for sharing those costs. The US will pay less. Germany will pay more. So now the US and Germany will pay the same, roughly 16% of NATO's budget. Then the rest will be shared among all the other allies. And this is a formula we then have agreed to finance the NATO budget.
For Mr. President Macron, in English. Or you can answer in French, of course. By saying that NATO is brain dead, is this your way of inviting Mr. Stoltenberg to come to Paris as soon as possible? And do you still think that NATO is brain dead? And also within the same perspective, member country Turkey says that it will block the deployment of enlarging troops in the Balkans and Poland if NATO does not support its military plans in northern Syria against the Kurdish militias. This is for both of you. What is your perspective on that? And finally, protecting Europe is also about digital security and cyber security. What is your position, for both of you, on Huawei building 5G networks in Europe?
On your first point, I have met the Secretary General time and time again before our summits, so I don't need to make a statement in the press to have the Secretary General come to France to speak. I just have been looking at what has happened over in the past and the future. And I see there is a disconnect between the two. And this time is for us to try and tackle the issue of reducing the financial burden that the US are taking on. There are a number of questions that haven't been resolved. Peace in Europe, what to do after the INF, what is happening in Turkey, who is the enemy? These are questions, a list of questions that still have no answer. There's no real point in tackling issues of burden sharing, of cost sharing, so that's why we needed to have a wake-up call. And that was the wake-up call that I tried to instigate with my press release, and I am glad that it was a wake-up call that was heard by many. So we have the heads of state and government with the Secretary General of the NATO organization who will meet, and using these questions as a basis point, we'll be able to tackle them and move forward on these major issues over the coming week at the summit and in the future. There's too much ambiguity in the future. And there's too much ambiguity when people start talking about how the funding goes into one specific area when the real issues are very concrete issues that we have to tackle. To touch on the question about cybersecurity, you're exactly right. Is this an issue for NATO to tackle? I think in terms of interoperability, it is definitely somehow in which NATO can help. For example, in France, we have our own services that are involved in cybersecurity. But when it comes to whether such and such a telco operator should be able to provide certain services, that's another issue. And I think this is something that should be tackled at the EU level. And for NATO should think about issues of autonomy from an operational point of view and the consequences that that will have on other activities which have a more commercial side. There are people out there who are going to use 5G as a 5G network. Now we have to ensure that all of the information and data that we use and that we send and receive via those channels, those 5G networks, for example, we have to ensure that we can keep them safe. Which is why sometimes it's not just a commercial decision that needs to be taken into account, but a strategic political decision that needs to be taken into account. Sometimes there are people who will entirely focus on the strategic point and won't take into account the commercial side of the issue. Now, I'm not trying to lay blame here. I just want to say that when we have infrastructure, military infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, or whether we have an operation carried out by France or carried out by our European partners, what we need to ensure is that in any situation, do we have any form of weakness, vulnerability, technological weakness? And this is a thought process that needs to be carried out, but it requires a lot of input from all people, from all parties, and I think that is going to be fruitful work in the future.
NATO is a strong alliance, but more than that, we are adapting, we are agile, and we are active. So we are responding to a changing world, and the reason why NATO is the most successful alliance in history is that we have been able to change when the world is changing, and that's exactly what we have done over the last years. That's exactly what we are doing. We continue to modernize this alliance by now addressing space, which is critical for our military operations on the ground, and also by addressing all the threats and challenges we see in cyberspace. We are stepping up our joint efforts to fight international terrorism. And as I said, we have just implemented the largest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation by higher readiness of our forces. And these are issues we will then continue to address when we meet at the leaders' meeting in London. In uncertain times, we need strong multilateral institutions, and therefore we need a strong NATO. Then there is no secret that there are disagreements and differences between NATO allies. We are 29 different allies, and of course there are differences. But the strength of NATO is that we have had the same kind of differences before, but every time we have been able to overcome them to agree around our core task, protecting and defending each other, one for all and one for all for one and one for all. And by doing that, we have been able to preserve peace for an unprecedented period in Europe, which is the main task for NATO, is to preserve peace. On Turkey, that's an example where we see differences. And I expressed my concerns about the consequences of the Turkish military operation into northeast Syria. So there are differences, but at the same time, we all agree on the importance of not jeopardize the gains we have made in the fight against ISIS. We have to remember that all NATO allies are part of the global coalition to defeat ISIS, Daesh. The fight is not over, but we have made enormous progress. Not so many months ago, ISIS controlled a territory as big as the United Kingdom, 8 million people. We have liberated all those people, millions of people, and all that territory. And we have a strong agreement in NATO that we must continue the fight against ISIS. And we just met in the global coalition where all NATO allies and NATO are members. On 5G, the 5G will affect all sides of our societies. It will connect almost all things working together, so it's important for transportation, for electricity, for all aspects of the civilian life, but of course also important for military operations. Therefore, the resilience, the security of these systems are of great importance. And that's also the reason why we recently agreed updated baseline requirements in NATO for telecommunications infrastructure. Our defense minister did that a few weeks ago, including requirements for 5G. This is about making sure that all allies have risk assessments, that they analyze vulnerabilities, that they look into risks related to, for instance, foreign ownership, foreign investments, infrastructure. And by doing that, we don't name any specific country or company, but we make sure that all allies take these risks seriously, and that we make sure that when we invest in 5G, we do that in a way which doesn't undermine the resilience of our societies.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you very much.